This is Reading the Times for Sunday, March 8th, 2020. Eric Prince recruits ex-spies to help infiltrate liberal groups. Mr. Seddon's role in the teachers' union operation, detailed in internal Project Veritas emails that have emerged from the discovery process of a court battle between the group and the union, have not previously been reported, nor has Mr. Prince's role in recruiting Mr. Seddon for the group's activities. Mr. Seddon regularly updated Mr. O'Keefe about the operation against the Michigan Teachers Union, according to internal Project Veritas emails, where the language of the group's leaders is marbled with spy jargon. Project Veritas tax filings list Mr. Haldeman as a project manager. Italy locks down much of the country's north over the coronavirus. Already, some members of Italy's parliament who come from the locked down areas in the Lombardy region have been quarantined to try to slow the spread of the virus. But the infection of a highly prominent figure like Mr. Zingaretti raised the prospect that more of Italy's political class had been exposed. The vast majority of those who died in Italy after contracting the virus were elderly, and many had serious underlying conditions and were destabilized by the virus. According to health experts, the virus has clearly now gained access to more exclusive halls of power in Rome. The Vatican on Friday confirmed its first case of the virus and shut some offices and closed its health clinic for sterilization. Inside Trump administration, debate raged over what to tell public, from Mr. Trump's first comments on the virus in January to rambling remarks at the CDC on Friday. Health experts say the administration has struggled to strike an effective balance between encouraging calm, providing key information, and leading an assertive response. The confused signals from the Trump administration, they say, left Americans unprepared for a public health crisis and delayed their understanding of a virus that has reached at least 28 states, infected more than 300 people, and killed at least 17. Mr. Azar was at his home in Bethesda, Maryland, on Friday, January 3rd, when Dr. Robert R. Redfield, the CDC's director, called to tell him China had potentially discovered a new coronavirus. Mr. Pence holds twice daily conference calls with officials from across the country, and a virus task force he leads issues daily talking points with comments from health professionals to make sure the message is consistent. Vigilantes in Greece say no more to migrants. Migrants resting as hundreds of others lined up for a meal at Turkey's border crossing with Greece and Pazarkul. The farmers and pensioners wore black clothes and heavy boots, imitating Greece's special forces, and trod along a rural road on a night patrol, looking for migrants trying to cross the northern land border with Turkey. A new center-right Greek government has temporarily suspended accepting asylum applications and pledged to summarily expel those who come in order to discourage migrants. A Sanders voter weary of debt at 29. I have nothing to lose. For voters like Mr. Michel's, Mr. Sanders has inspired loyalty because he's the rare political leader who has both diagnosed the source of their problems and tried to offer solutions. Mr. Michel's has heard the critiques of Mr. Sanders. He's unelectable. Mr. Michel's never considered voting for Mr. Trump, finding him unappealing and bothered by his stance on climate change. China may be beating the coronavirus at a painful cost. There is no question that China's bold approach to the rapid spread of the new respiratory pathogen has changed the course of what was rapidly escalating and continues to be a deadly epidemic. Dr. Bruce Aylward, the leader of the WHO team that visited China, told reporters in Beijing late last month. China's experience combating the virus has also highlighted the risk of family transmission if hospitals run out of beds and testing kits, as they did in Wuhan, where for weeks many who were sick were sent home and infected their relatives. Given the global spread of the virus and the difficulty of spotting mild cases, they say it is unlikely it will ever be completely eliminated, even in China. A Quebec ban on religious symbols upends lives and careers. Francois Legault, the right-leaning Quebec premier, says the law, which applies to Muslims' headscarves, Sikh turbans, Jewish skullcaps, Catholic crosses, and other religious symbols, upholds the separation between religion and state and maintains a neutrality of public sector's workers. Jean Duhamel, emeritus professor of religion at the University of Montreal, said that even before the recent law, the wearing of crosses in the public sector was stigmatized and discouraged in Quebec society. Even before the law passed, the Quebec government had banned several Sikhs from entering the Quebec legislature with small ceremonial daggers or kirpans under their clothing. Boris Johnson launches war on UK's own deep state. Chosen through the competitive exam process, civil servants pride themselves on their skill in pulling the levers of government and in offering unvarnished advice to a changing cast of politically appointed ministers. The political agnosticism of British civil servants is so celebrated that in the popular comic series, Yes, Minister, about a permanent secretary and his minister, the government's party affiliation is never even mentioned. Still, for all the furor over Miss Patel's clash with Mr. Rutnam, Mr. Stanley said the bigger danger was the tendency of civil services to function as courtiers, appeasing their ministers rather than challenging them. Supporter of Gabriel Masneff says he was unaware of pedophilia. Mr. Girard, who started working for Mr. St. Laurent and Mr. Berger in 1977, said that though he had literary interest, watched apostrophes, and read Le Monde, he had never heard Mr. Masneff's name until 1986. Masneff, for me, I learned of him, of his name, and of his existence as a writer in 1986, Mr. Girard said. In consent, Miss Springora writes that staying at a hotel allowed him to evade police officers who had begun visiting his apartment. Mr. Girard said he was only an intermediary acting on Mr. Berger's orders, but Mr. Masneff referred to Mr. Girard as a patron and dedicated to him his diary of that era, La prunelle de mes yeux, or the apple of my eye. The diary details Mr. Masneff's relationship with the 14-year-old Miss Springora. Me, I don't remember ever having read it, he said of the diary. Mr. Girard could not explain why he told Le Parisien newspaper last month that he read parts of it. Mr. Girard said he had a dinner a few months ago with Mr. Masneff, but did not consider him a friend. Mr. Girard acknowledged that in recent years, he and the writer dropped the vous in addressing each other and adopted the less formal tu, generally used in French society by people with a close tie. Me, I don't use a tu much in general, said Mr. Girard, but he could not explain why he used it with Mr. Masneff. Lebanon will default on foreign debt payment amid deepening economic crises. Lebanon will default on $1.2 billion in foreign currency debts coming due on Monday, the Prime Minister said Saturday, as the country lurched deeper into an economic crisis that has set off widespread anti-government protests and left the country grasping for a foreign bailout. The country has floundered in the grip of simultaneous political and economic crises for nearly half a year, as the remittances from Lebanese working abroad aid from the Gulf countries, and financial wizardry at Lebanon's banks, which has kept the economy buoyant for years, began to collapse. The slumping economy helped drive hundreds of thousands of Lebanese across the country into the streets in mid-October, denouncing the political elite for mismanagement and corruption that have left the country unable to provide basics such as 24-hour electricity and reliable running water. Roundup of Saudi royals expands with detention of a fourth prince. Analysts who follow the royal family said Saturday that the latest wave of arrest raised questions about whether Crown Prince Mohammed would soon seek to take formal power from his aging father, King Salman, 84. Others suggested that the crown prince, who established himself as a de facto ruler of the kingdom in the name of his father, was worried about discontent within the royal family as plummeting oil prices strained the country's budget and economy. Outside Saudi Arabia, the prince is best known for his association with the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, a dissident and newspaper columnist, by Saudi agents in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018. But even for Prince Mohammed, the detention of his uncle, Prince Ahmed, startled many analysts. Prince Mohammed bin Naif, and Prince Nawaf were all arrested on Friday, according to 3 people familiar with the matter. Coronavirus closed this Starbucks, but Seattle needs its coffee. Michelle Miele, on her way to meet a friend for coffee in downtown Seattle on Saturday, stopped to snap a photo on her phone of a sign posted on the door of a Starbucks saying that the store was temporarily closed and that it was sorry for the inconvenience. On Friday, a Starbucks employee at a downtown location was confirmed to have the virus, closing that store and forcing residents to confront the reality that even a small daily ritual like morning cup of coffee would be affected by the virus. Seattle is freaking out, said Lenny Galaviz, who stopped to take a photograph through the window of the closed store, a Starbucks Reserve, where alcohol is also served, and special glass beakers are lined up for cold brews and other specialty drinks. For urban poor, the coronavirus complicates existing health risks. The challenges of treating low-income minorities were evident on a recent afternoon when Miss Allen set out in the community to meet with patients. With a patient population that is more than half black, the clinic tries to project an uplifting message. Black faces are emblazoned on a chart that patients use to describe their moods. Coronavirus in New York. Cuomo declares a state of emergency. New York State now has nearly 50 people who have tested positive for the illness, most of them in Westchester County, just north of New York City. The new case in Queens appears to put the total for the city at 5. Public health workers and government officials have linked a majority of the state's cases to a cluster in Westchester that first came to the authorities' attention after a New Rochelle resident was confirmed as New York's second coronavirus patient. At least 44 people in New York State have been placed under mandatory quarantine as of Friday, including 33 in Westchester County, 9 in New York City, and 1 in Nassau County on Long Island, and 1 in Erie County in western New York. New Jersey officials said on Friday that 4 people in the state had tested positive for the virus: a 32-year-old man, a man in his 50s, a woman in her 30s, all from Bergen County near New York, and a man in his 60s from Camden County in the southern part of the state. CPAC attendee had the coronavirus, officials say. An attendee of the conservative conference where President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence spoke last week had tested positive for the coronavirus, according to the event's organizer. Stephanie Grisham, the White House press secretary, said in a statement that there was no indication that either President Trump or Vice President Pence met with anyone in close proximity to the attendee. The Republicans who have broken with the president and his agenda, like Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, were disinvited from the conference, and the mention of Mr. Romney's name by one conservative speaker elicited boos from the audience. Anyone who wants a coronavirus test can have one, Trump says. Not quite, says his administration. On Friday, Mr. Trump characterized the government's testing aptitude as amazing and called the CDC's test perfect. Statements that have been roundly disputed by scientists and health officials who have expressed alarm over the speed with which the CDC has tested and over the quality of its test. People can be overly reassured by a negative test or overly panicked by a positive test. Having a thoughtful approach to testing is important. You have the president saying that anybody who wants a test can have a test. That's beautiful, he said on MSNBC. You have the vice president saying we can't do the test. We don't have the capacity. Nursing home hit by coronavirus, says 70 workers are sick. A week after a deadly coronavirus outbreak was reported inside a nursing home in the Seattle suburb, officials from the long-term care center said on Saturday that 70 staff members were out sick with symptoms resembling coronavirus, and 6 residents were also ill. At another nursing home outside Seattle, Issaquah Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, officials say 2 residents who had been sent to the hospital on Thursday were confirmed to have the coronavirus. Kurt Bailey, who leads the nonprofit Bloodworks Northwest, which supplies blood to 90 hospitals in the region, said the coronavirus outbreak has led to a rare confluence of factors that is keeping donors away. Many businesses have told employees to work from home and have canceled blood drives. Older people, who are among the most frequent blood donors, are particularly at risk from coronavirus and have been staying home, and some people are avoiding any group assembly point. There won't be a gay president in 2021. So what does Buttigieg's campaign tell us? It was a question that followed former Mayor Pete Buttigieg everywhere he went from when he first announced his presidential campaign. Is the country ready to send a gay man to the White House? In certain progressive circles, in online commentary, and in much of the national media, the history-making aspect of Mr. Buttigieg's campaign often warranted only a passing and perfunctory mention. Robert Robin, a Democratic consultant who works on liberal causes and diversity initiatives, likened Mr. Buttigieg's campaign to the moment in 1984 when Jesse Jackson stood on stage with his family at the Democratic National Convention. Their campaign jobs just dried up, and on Venmo, the drinks are flowing. The practice has spread unexpectedly and unplanned from campaign to campaign like a viral video with a life of its own. $10 here, $25 even, $100. It peaked this past week as Miss Warren followed Tom Steyer, Pete Buttigieg, Senator Amy Klobuchar, and Michael R. Bloomberg to the exits. Anecdotally, Democratic campaign professionals reported fewer funds flowing to aides of Mr. Bloomberg when he dropped out. Zach Grauman, who served as a campaign manager for the businessman and political outsider Andrew Yang, got his first Venmo not the day his candidate dropped out, but when his beloved Buffalo Bills lost in the NFL playoffs. The mission to hunt Nazis has become a race against time. Mr. Berger then made another choice, Mr. Rosenbaum said, to not request a transfer when he was assigned to a sub-camp overseeing prisoners in the Nungam concentration camp system near Meppen, Germany. Mr. Berger's story is not quite over. He has 30 days to appeal the deportation order. Federal prosecutors are just about finished with such Nazi-era cases, given the advanced ages of the suspects, Mr. Rosenbaum said. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where Mr. Berger has lived for decades, was almost entirely constructed around the United States bomb-building efforts during World War II, becoming the administrative and military headquarters for the Manhattan Project, the effort to build the first nuclear weapon. Veterans are working, but not in jobs that match their advanced training. Officials at the Department of Veteran Affairs, which has put together several programs that help place veterans in jobs, concede that this is among the chief obstacles, their chief obstacles. Because of all these programs, veterans are better equipped to reach the American dream than their non-veteran counterparts. said Margarita Devlin, the Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Benefits at the Department of Veteran Affairs. Ms. Roberts of LinkedIn looked at veteran networks that were composed of about 28% other veterans and compared them with non-veteran networks, which were made up of less than 2% veterans. Fourth time's the charm, Mark Meadows takes over Trump's White House. One day last month, Mark Meadows went on Fox News to defend President Trump's decision to begin purging the government of officials perceived to be disloyal to him. A former real estate developer turned conservative bomb thrower, Mr. Meadows made his name as a disruptor of the system, clashing repeatedly with the House Republican leaders over spending, immigration, and other issues, and inciting the rebellion that forced Speaker John A. Boehner to step down in 2015. Mr. Meadows has helped blow up bipartisan deals over the budget, health care, and immigration that he argued has sold out conservative principles, and was an architect of the partial government shutdown of 2018-19 that failed to win Mr. Trump the border wall money he demanded. At one point early last year, during testimony by Mr. Trump, former personal lawyer Michael D. Cohen, who described the president as racist, Mr. Meadows sought to counter the allegations by presenting a black political appointee of Mr. Trump. If I'm going to die, I may as well be cheerful about it. Facing death offers us an opportunity to work with everything we have within us and everything we know about the world. I've seen my parents and my husband's parents die. Bad deaths, with months of suffering and too much medical intervention. I've witnessed peaceful deaths in rooms filled with loved ones. What happens after death is a popular topic among people I know. The rise of location trackers for kids as young as 3. Take the Gizmo, the smartwatch marketed to parents of children as young as 3 as a safety tool, which allows parents to track their children using GPS. There's also the Wizard Watch, the Doki Pal, and the TikTok, among others. There's some evidence that anxiety among children is on the rise. A study published in 2018 showed that a diagnosis of anxiety for children 6 to 17 rose nearly 20% between 2003 and 2012. We don't need to add to it, especially considering that children are far safer by many measures than they were 50 years ago. Certainly for children with special needs who may not be able as independent as other children their age, the GPS tracking feature makes more sense. I'm Chinese. That doesn't mean I have the coronavirus. You know, we are scared of you Chinese people, she said loudly, because you eat weird food and you bring it here. Chinese people, I don't like you. You are so bad. You're so bad and so gross. People in America aren't sharing enough of these stories because what they really want to share is fear. In my family, people call me the pit bull because I'm the first to fight back if someone attacks my people. Bernie Sanders has already won the Democratic primary. At a debate last month, Bernie Sanders' rivals for the Democratic presidential nomination were asked if they were concerned about the party's possibly graduating a Democratic socialist to the general election. Although there is scant evidence in recent elections that a Democrat running on Sanders' platform can win anywhere but in the decidedly blue districts and states, that platform colored the Democratic primary in a bold and indelible way. As a result, they added, if Biden or Buttigieg actually win the nomination, they'll be running on the most progressive platform of any Democratic nominee in history. Don't let Trump pay back evangelicals like this. Lawyers from conservative Christian legal organizations, including the Alliance Defending Freedom, argued that refusing to allocate public money for religious institutions amounted to discrimination against religion. As a further bonus, when the money gets funneled to religious organizations, some of it can then be pumped back into the right-wing political machine through religious organizations and policy groups they support, which act as de facto partisan political cells. Religious nationalists dream of a time when most or all social welfare services pass through the hands of religious entities. The open borders trap. Nothing propelled Mr. Trump's rise more than his attacks on immigration. Yet some progressives reject the notion that immigration needs to be defended at all. In his recent book, Immigration Reform, Mr. Kamasaki, who worked for migrant rights for nearly 40 years, advises other progressives to moderate their tone, to seek bipartisan compromise, avoid assuming all opponents are racist, and question whether unfettered immigration is necessary in the community's interest. If progressives deplore Trumpism and immigration fueled it, should the left moderate its immigration demands. Why Democrats are still not the party of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. As scores of Democrats saw in 2018 and still more saw on Super Tuesday, much of the rest of the country's Democrats, especially older African American voters, who are a major component of the base, prefer more centrist candidates. What is more, many Democrats began to fret early on that the far left was going to do to them what the Tea Party had done to the Republicans a few years back, run them out of town, one primary at a time. There's some people that just think that we're out of touch, and if we just work hard, more Democrats would come out of the woodwork. So we should try to say all the things that excite all the Democrats. You can say that until you're blue in the face. There's just not that many Democrats in my district. Are you an anti-influencer? Working with a political economist, Claire Yang, of the University of Washington, Professors Tucker and Sinister compared the contributions to congressional campaigns made by Harbinger zip codes, identified again through their purchasing decisions, with those made by neighboring zip codes over the course of 5 federal election cycles. Their analyses showed that when households in Harbinger zip codes moved, they tended to move to other Harbinger zip codes, while households in non-Harbinger zip codes did the opposite. If you're not a Harbinger and you accidentally move into a Harbinger zip code, you don't start buying strange products, Professor Tucker explained. With coronavirus, healthcare for some is a recipe for disaster. The agency said the new regulations were essential to a goal more important than protecting public health, making immigrants self-sufficient. On Monday, more than 70 public health experts laid out very clear steps for doing exactly that. In 2018, before COVID-19 was known to humans, when the public charge rule was still just a proposal, Wendy Parment, a professor of law and public health at Northeastern University, warned that the push for immigrant self-sufficiency would be both dangerous and quixotic. Rethinking the primary system. Ranked choice voting, in which voters rank the candidates in order of preference, makes the most sense. I'd more strongly advocate for approval voting, which allows voters to choose all the candidates on the ballot they approve of, and the candidate with the most votes win. In all elections, including primaries, we would cast no votes for some or none, or even all the candidates, and at the end of the day, the winner would be the person with the fewest no votes. Trump's crazy fantasy world. Plouffe described the network as Trump's West World, a fantasy realm where the president can be the man he wants to be, rather than the man he is. Many Trump critics in 2016 and in the year after his election pushed the idea that his father had suffered from Alzheimer's and now Trump was losing it, and that his vocabulary was eroding. In his new book, Front Row at the Trump Show, Jonathan Karl, the chief White House correspondent for ABC News, reports the surprising fact that one of those calls on Trump derangement came from inside the White House. The coronavirus is coming for the Trump presidency. Donald Trump called into Fox News and dismissed concerns about the swine flu, telling host Neil Cavuto, it's gonna go away. Trump also cautioned that the vaccines, they can be very dangerous. Matthew Baum of Harvard found people in red states were indeed less likely to get vaccinated and more likely to die of swine flu. In the end, that swine flu outbreak wasn't as lethal as many had feared, but it still killed or contributed to the deaths of as many as 400,000 people worldwide. Beware the deadly contagion spread by blowhards. On January 31st, over a month ago, the Trump administration made an excellent decision. In an effort to limit the spread of the coronavirus, it forbade most foreign nationals from entering the United States if they had recently traveled to China. It's certainly true that the travel ban could not and did not prevent the coronavirus from reaching the United States. Weeks ago, the White House should have begun working with states and cities to devise a uniform response to the outbreaks and with Congress to readily aid packages for regions that need to go into lockdown, and perhaps to prepare a general stimulus as well. Let it snow. Not like Vermont or the Adirondacks in upstate New York, where it snows on and off all winter, barely registering a mention at the corner store. On March 7, 2003, my opening on one such article was simply, it wasn't even that it was snowing in March, but that it already snowed so many times that winter that Central Park had recorded 45 inches, doubling the seasonal snowfall average then of 22 inches. Still, winters without snow should be noted and mourned, at least in my small corner of the globe about 5 miles north of New York City. There's no planning for childbirth. Most perks of a modern hospital birth, blood transfusions, antibiotics, epidural anesthesia, were yet to be invented, so birthing in hospitals made little difference, which is maybe why 33 years later, when seated in a welcoming circle of pregnant people in a prenatal class, I shared my own birth plan, a birth fantasy, really, that went like this. A healthy couple of weeks before my actual due date, my water would break in a gentle drizzle. The ever-increasing medication of birth had collided with a second-wave feminist concern that pregnant women were losing their agency in a male-dominated medical field, and the new birth plan was an unlikely makeshift truce. She was excited for a new school. Then anti-Semitic jokes started. There had been other anti-Semitic slights at the high school, the Marine Academy of Science and Technology, a competitive military-themed magnet school in the seaside borough of Highlands, but nothing as blatant as this. Paige's parents, who still lived near the school but want to move, now say the deepest regret is keeping Paige at Mast as long as they did. Paige left Mast and started senior year at a nearby high school, Shore Regional, but she left that school shortly after, she said, when some students found out what happened and wouldn't talk to her. They started a karaoke club in their house because the internet wanted it. As the proprietors and residents of Lion's Roar Karaoke House, Mr. Williams, 52, and Mrs. Solar Williams, 47, have hosted up to 30 singers and carousers at a time in their living room almost every weekend for 4 years. In late 2012, the couple was lounging in bed watching television when they received a random phone call from someone who said that it was with 10 other people. He'd like to come over for karaoke. Mr. Williams recalled as Mr. DiPrima's party got into full swing, Mr. Williams served as the DJ, announcing each singer, while Mrs. Soler Williams attended to the guests, showing them to the garbage, refilling the ice bucket, and pausing to dance and sing along. How Brian and Jamie Stelter, news anchors, spend their Sundays. The married media duo Jamie and Brian Stelter reach distinct audiences. In an ideal world, I will sleep at 8:30. Brian, once I say goodnight to Jamie, I pivot to the newsletter for CNN. I do it 6 nights a week. Every Sunday night, I start a new email to Jamie that becomes our email for the week. He played with Charlie Parker. For $15, he'll play with you. On a recent Tuesday evening, about 15 minutes before the session was to start, adults of all ages started jostling for the most coveted spot, the seat on the piano next to Dr. Harris, who always plays by example and always listens. Dr. Harris has worked on or played with everyone from Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins to Sonny Stitt. He played with Cannonball Adderley, Dexter Gordon, and Yusuf Lateef. Come on, young man, you think a grown man play like that? Dr. Harris shot at a man in his 60s, wearing business casual and struggling through a piece. I was on the F train, headed to an afternoon doctor's appointment. One morning, we went to a cafe in Soho for breakfast. As we went inside, I held the door for a slim older woman with long gray hair. She was wearing a flannel with a black beanie. My paychecks were dismal at the time, so I took him up on his offer and went home with my new O'Keefe. Your 8 most vexing tax questions answered. Then go to the Internal Revenue Service's tax withholding estimator tool online, which will provide instructions on how to fill out your W-4. What is the IRS has built is user-friendly, but it is kind of like doing your own tax return on their website, said Julie Welch, an accountant in Leawood, Kansas. Deducting up to $4,000 is possible again for tax years 2019 and 2018, even if you do not itemize everywhere on your tax return. A big gift for the 2017 tax legislation is also among its mysteries. What sort of work do you need to be engaged in to obtain every bit of the new 20% tax deduction on qualified business income? 9 reasons to stop doing your own taxes. Our view is that your tax return should be numbers on a form that you've thought and talked about all year instead of throwing numbers up in the air and hoping for the best, said Jennifer Kohlbacher, an accountant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In the year after the death of a life partner, grief alone, the sheer weight of it, could be reason enough to hand the tax task off to a professional. These include how to treat income before and after the date of death, which tax return any income belongs on, deciphering the tax implications of the will, figuring out what value to set for the cost of inherited assets, and on and on. A better situation. Attend some employer education sessions before selling stock, plot out every tax ramification with the help of a professional, and put the tax money away after sale before doing anything else. The tax code is overtaxed. Many of these special tax provisions are popular, achieve important goals, and in many cases have good reasons for operating through the tax code as opposed to more straightforward channels, whereas new spending may have to survive a politically fraught appropriation process. Every year, a new provision in the tax code will typically remain law until a future Congress decides to overhaul the tax system, a more rare occurrence. Tax expenditures aren't viewed the same way as in addition to the budget, said Mark W. Everson, a former IRS commissioner who is now vice chairman of Alliant Group, a tax consulting firm. A gig worker's guide to filing taxes. Freelancers, independent contractors, and gig workers like Mr. Eglern have more work to do during tax season than traditional employees. Freelancers must track their income, document expenses, and pay their estimated tax bill, and most filers need to sort it out by April 15th. Here's some advice on how to make it more managed from veteran freelancers and the tax professionals who work with them. Many self-employed people may be eligible for a tax break enacted as part of the 2017 tax law. IRA rules have changed, and heirs need to pay attention. A beneficiary who is less than 10 years younger than the account's own. A beneficiary who is less than 10 years younger than the account's owner, say a brother or a sister, can also continue to stretch the IRA. The new rules apply to both the traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs, as well as 401k workplace retirement accounts. Unlike the traditional IRAs, money is contributed to a Roth after tax, so taxes generally aren't owed on withdrawals as long as certain rules are followed. The Roth option as a planning tool becomes more interesting. Under the new rules, said Effie Komanakos, a wealth manager in Wilmington, Delaware. Another approach is for the account owner to divide the IRA funds among several beneficiaries, each giving less money and minimizing certain tax concerns. How Democrats would raise taxes on the rich. In recent decades, relatively low taxes on capital gains have contributed to widening inequality by allowing wealthy Americans who draw substantial income from such profits to pay lower effective federal tax rates than some workers who earn far less money entirely through their labor. Mr. Wyden calls a step-up benefit and the fact that assets are taxed only when they're sold and not as they appreciate in value loopholes that wealthy Americans exploit to reduce their tax bill. Mr. Wyden's own tax plan, released last fall, would require annual tax payments from high earners whose assets appreciate in value. For example, when their stock or bond portfolios gain value. That has been Reading the Times for Sunday, March 8th.